So there is conversation, and conversation is perhaps ignored because it's more complicated to teach. It's certainly easier for me to teach someone to ask for a cookie than it is for me to teach someone to talk about what happened during their day, right? But if you think about the course of your own day and the things that you communicate across the day, the majority of things that you communicate across the day have nothing to do with your wants and needs. The majority of the things that you communicate about across the day have to do with conversation, sharing information, gaining information, griping about something, right? There's very little of our daily communication that is about wants and needs. So we need to remember that for the individuals that we're supporting, even if we don't think that they're very interested in it. Sometimes what looks like lack of interest is more about skill deficit, right? If conversation is really challenging, why would I want to do it? There's nothing reinforcing about this because it's so challenging. So if we think about teaching and providing some conversation supports and we make conversation easier, conversation might actually become something that's enjoyable that a person then wants to engage in, right? Lots of people with autism tell us, it's not that they don't want to engage with other people. It's not that they don't like other people. It's not that they want to be alone all the time. And in fact, lots of people with autism talk about themselves as being lonely, right? The issue is often that they don't have a skill set that allows them to engage with other people, right? So we need to be thinking about that, and we need to remember that when we're thinking about communication interventions, right? Not just wants and needs. So there are all kinds of things that we can do in terms of conversational supports, and one is visual bridges. How many of you are familiar with Linda Hodgson? See, it's been a while. Deborah and I were talking about how, visual supports used to be something, it was such a hot topic, and Linda Hodgson was really kind of the first person that brought visual supports to the world stage. She's an SLP by trade. But it's been a while, and I can see that, by looking at the 2 or 3 hands, most of you don't know who she is, and she's really kind of the person that brought visual supports out. So she talks about visual bridges. And we'll look at some examples of visual bridges. But visual bridges are supports that help take information from one environment to another environment. So how many of you are parents? And how many of you would really, really like it if your child could come home at the end of a school day and tell you about what happened? Right. And how many of you find it quite upsetting that that doesn't happen and wonder what happened at school today? Did my kid have a good day? Did he have a bad day? Why? Yeah. That's what environmental supports are about, right? And so I'm often putting visual bridges and that kind of environmental support to help with that because it's important. Parents, of course, want to know what happened during their kid's day, right? And it is a very difficult thing for parents if their kid can't come home and communicate what happened during the day. Think about what that would be like as a parent. Did something bad happen today? Did something fun happen today? Were people nice to my kid? Were people not nice to my kid, right? I don't know, right? You can only kind of go by what people tell you, and what's usually in the communication book? Good day or bad day, right? Often that's all you get, and we'll acknowledge that people at school are also incredibly busy, right? We have fewer resources in school, so it's not like, the aide or the teacher has, 20 minutes at the end of the school day to write a long letter about everything that happened. So that's also understandable, but it's also very frustrating if you're a parent and just every single day the communication book just says, he had a good day, right? You know that, because these are the things that I hear from parents. So we can look at visual bridges. We'll also take a look at conversation books to help people initiate and engage in conversations about topics that have been set up in advance, right? So they're kind of conversational supports. So we'll look at those too. Visual bridges, however, kind of look like this. They can look different depending on the needs of the person, but it's really about taking information from one environment and bringing it to another environment. So in this case, here's a today at school with a whole bunch of things that might happen at school, and the student circles what happened that day. Right? I've also used bingo daubers. Children really tend to enjoy the bingo daubers, and they bingo daub the things that happened. Just a word of warning, You don't want an overly exuberant bingo dauber. So I had an overly exuberant bingo dauber one year with very, very blonde hair. And so he exuberantly bingo daubed with a blue bingo dauber that exploded. And he had blue hair for about 2 weeks and, blue arms and blue everything. So not good for the exuberant folk, unless you're going to carefully monitor their degree of exuberance. But kids often really like bingo daubing because that's just a little bit of added fun. But simply circling what happened. This one is a bit more detailed, and it also uses an individual's literacy skills. And this one is what happened at home and being able to bring information from home to school. Also important, because if you think about what happens at school a lot, in the sort of earlier primary grades where we have circle time, which is often not an enjoyable time for many of our students, because it's an awful lot of blah, 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 blah. But sometimes part of that blah blah is about boys and girls. What did you do yesterday when you got home? And our kids neither understand what everyone else has done, nor do they have a way to convey, and now it's just a lesson in sitting for a long time, which is why our students tend not to do very well in it, right? Why would I want to sit here? Because there's nothing here that I can access. So it could be a last night at home, and in this case, for dinner I ate, and the kid fills it in at home the night before and can bring it to school, and during that morning meeting or circle time or whatever we're calling it, can talk about, here are the things that I did, right? The teacher, if the teacher wants to be really clever about this during circle time, if we're having that sort of sharing, maybe we could have a whole bunch of symbols at the front of the room, and every student could come up and pick 2 or 3 symbols of things that they did last night and show while they're telling their little story. I watched TV, I watched blah, 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 blah. At the very least, the kid with autism who's sitting there can go, oh, they watched TV, right? It at least provides a bit more accessibility. Right? So really simple kinds of things. So it can be basic, no literacy required, all the way to, much more detailed. So I had a teacher. It was always nice when I worked at the School for the Deaf. So many of the teachers that I worked with, I'd have one of my students in their classroom, and I'd come into the class and say, well, here's something that would help this student, and then the teacher would do it for all of the students. And so in one of the grade 1 classes where I had a student once, I wanted a support like this of what happened at school today, and I wanted my student to fill it out at the end of the day, and the teacher said, oh, well, this is a great thing for all of the kids. We'll all do it at the end of the day. And so she'd made these, and at the end of the day, all of the kids sat at their desks, they all got it today at school, and she had a visual schedule. She also made a visual schedule with symbols that my student used, and had words for the kids who were learning to read, and they'd go through the schedule. Okay, boys and girls, what did we do first? We did calendar. Okay, everybody circle calendar. And then we did gym, and circle gym. And so it was a whole class thing now. And all of the kids then had something to go home, because typical kids do this as well, right? Typical kids go home, what did you do at school today? And the answer is, nothing. Right? So this can help the typical kids as well. So there's certainly that way of doing things, and really basic. And I remember Darren's mom, we started to do this. Darren didn't convey information back and forth. Darren was learning to make basic requests, but mom really wanted to sort of connect with him about what had happened during the day. And so he was a bingo dauber, not too exuberant. So he would bingo daub and bring it home. And his mom would tell me that it was part of their routine. When they got home, they'd come inside, and they'd take their coats and their shoes off, and they'd go sit down together on the couch, and they'd just look at the page together. So he'd have it all bingo daubed, and she'd just point at the things, and she'd nod and smile, and she'd thumbs up things. And they had this 2 or 3 minute exchange. And that's all she wanted. She was thrilled with that, right? That's what he could do at that time. That's what he understood. And she was thrilled because they were spending 2 or 3 minutes at the end of every school day just going over what had happened, right? Later on, we worked on having him smile, circle smiley faces or sad faces. Did he like it? Did he not like it, right? And providing a bit more information. But just something where the two of them could sit down at the end of every school day and look at the shape of the day and what he had done. I've had other families use it at dinner time, right? And so they have their child bring it to the dinner table, and when everybody's talking about their day, it's there as a conversational support. And if the student can talk, they talk off of it, right? Kind of, I went to gym, or they'll say gym. And if it's a kid who doesn't talk, they just point and show the other members at the table. Here's what I did at school today, right? So it can be very, very simple for very early communicators. I've had other students do their forms like this, where their sort of take home and show your family what you did at school today paper is also their daily schedule. So they come into school in the morning and they paste in a symbol for whatever day of the week it is. And they paste symbols for what the schedule is going to be. So the teacher might have the class schedule on a pocket chart at the front of the room, and they would select the correct paper symbols that are all pre-cut and ready for them, and they would glue them in the same order, and now that's their schedule for the day that they'll carry around with them. And as they complete activities, they check them off, just like with a day planner, and then they take that home at the end of the day, right? So now it's a twofer. It's their daily schedule, and it's their, here's what I did today, mom, dad. This is another one that I made for students, again, with the information of the schedule. And so this student would look at the class schedule and set up her schedule to look the same, and she had a date stamp. She loved the date stamp, so she would date stamp the date. She knew how to tell times, so the times were in here. And then we had 3 feelings, and she could circle how she felt about each activity as the activities ended. And eventually we added another column that had those same 3 feelings, but for the SEA to fill in. And sometimes both the student and the SEA were happy, and sometimes the SEA had a different feeling. And then it was a really great conversational starter at home, because this was a student who could have a conversation, and then mom would ask, you were happy, but she was upset. Why was that? And then she'd get a story, right? And then usually the SEA had also provided a little bit of information about the discrepancy in feelings in the conversation book, but then they could have a conversation about what had happened to create that discrepancy, right? So all sorts of things that you can do. But the idea is really about taking information from one environment and bringing it to another. So it could be from school to home, it could be from home to school, it could be from the respite care environment back home. It could be from a vocational setting back home, right? So it could be all kinds of things depending on the environments where a person's spending their time.